Good afternoon and welcome to my message of the day. I'm Warren, the rector here at St Columba's. When I was younger, I read the parts of scripture that I could understand, and that was really limited to the words of Jesus to be found in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke. I'm thinking here of passages like the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6 and 7. They're beautiful sayings, the teaching of Jesus, to love one another, forgive one another, turn the other cheek, etc. The sort of things that are, if you like, classic Jesus. And the stories where he got himself into trouble, where he might make a healing and there were those who were opposed to what he did, or how he welcomed sinners. All these kinds of passages. And I loved those passages, and I loved the Jesus that I found in those stories. But it occurred to me after a number of years reading scripture like this, that there was a whole lot of the rest of scripture which I was really, in a way, ignoring and perhaps even a bit distrustful about, on the basis that I couldn't make sense of it, or enough sense of it. Perhaps even there were passages that I didn't like, that said things contrary to what I thought. So there was a clash, if you like. Then it occurred to me that really, if I'm trusting the process that brought me the copy of the scriptures where I could read the words of Jesus, if I can trust that process and the people that made that possible, and I'm thinking here way back, the people who heard Jesus, the early church, wrote down letters, St. Paul's letters to Corinth and Rome, etc. And then these books were chosen amongst others to be scripture and to function as the rule of life, the rule of belief for us. For 2,000 years, and Christians had faithfully handed these scriptures on, made sure they'd be printed and disseminated so that someone like me could get them and read them. I thought to myself, if I can trust that it's worked for the words of Jesus that I like, is it possible that the rest is trustworthy too? It's just that I don't know enough, or perhaps I'm interpreting it wrong. And that was a challenge. So then that's when I started to take seriously the idea that I should try and learn more about Scripture from within its pages, from within its own logic, if you like, rather than bringing what I think already to Scripture and finding those passages which confirm what I already think. That was a turning point for me. If you like, I was pragmatically trying Scripture. What was it like to take more seriously St. Paul's, what he wrote in the letter to the Romans, and to work on that? And to do that, to understand it at all, I had to do some reading, some thinking, listen to people, etc. Over time. Doing this with Scripture, unless you do it intensely in a degree or something, I suppose, it's sort of like a snowball effect. Actually, even when you do a degree, it's still a snowball effect. The more you learn, the easier it is to pick up more and more and more. And you do it over time, consistently. This is one of the keys to understanding Scripture. But the turning point was really for me to realise that I was excluding most of Scripture because I didn't understand it, which doesn't really sound like a very sound way of approaching Scripture. And importantly, I could see that it wasn't just that I couldn't understand it, that perhaps my way of looking at the world and my grid of interpretation that I brought to Scripture was actually preventing me from understanding Scripture. So it was a challenge to say, actually, Warren, you might have to change how you see the world. Some of the issues which you think are important might have to be reviewed in the light of what Scripture wishes to teach. And that was an important journey for me, which I'm still on. When I approach Scripture, there are parts of Scripture which I don't understand really, and there's plenty of it. And I don't reject it out of hand thinking, well, I don't understand that. I think, well, there must be more to it then. So I want to understand it. So I try to learn, try to make sense of it. And I do that in a way that challenges me, that forms me, rather than me trying to make Scripture say what I think it should say, to try and read Scripture on its own logic and to bring myself in line with it. That's part of what it means to take Scripture as canon, as Scripture, that it's going to form me and interpret me rather than the other way around. And this insight that Scripture is there to inform us, and we aren't just meant to go to Scripture and reject those bits that we don't like or something, or we can't make sense of, applies to the key doctrines of the church as well. So when people read the creed, people have told me that sometimes what they do is they won't read those bits. When we recite the creed at church, they won't recite those bits that they don't like or don't understand. And in a way, that's sort of doing what I used to do with Scripture. But I changed my mind on this with the creeds as well. And that was part of my journey doing my PhD, was to actually try to understand more. If the church had got so much right in transmitting to me about Jesus, how likely was it that was completely off with the creed? Not very much, actually. There wasn't much chance of that. There was more to the creed than I thought. That's when I wanted to learn more. And I had to learn it from within its own logic and to see what it was trying to say and what it was trying to steer me towards. It was another turning point for me. I could give other examples very quickly. It occurred to me that, because I used to be one of those Christians that out of hand rejected the possibility of any miracles at all. It's just impossible. It breaks the scientific paradigm which I held to be ironclad. And then it occurred to me, hang on. So I'm saying to myself that for all of human history, virtually, there have been people, virtually all people have believed in miracles. And what I'm saying that in the last couple of 100 years, perhaps only in the last 150, suddenly there's a generation of people who can say, oh, actually everyone else in the history of the world has been wrong. They've either lied to themselves about what they saw, or they had the wool pulled over their eyes. And we are the first few generations that have been honest enough to say that, or smart enough to see through the deception. And that's when I thought to myself, hang on, that just sounds so arrogant to think that everyone else prior to this had either lied to themselves or had the wool pulled over their eyes when what they saw was a healing. That's when I decided that just straight then, I believed in miracles. At least the possibility of miracles. That when I read in the Bible that Jesus could heal someone, yeah, it happened. And why out of hand reject it? Didn't make sense to me. Actually, it was more rational to think that miracles do happen. Anyway, maybe I could explore that a little bit later in another message of the day. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.